Commander Zethkara stood before the massive viewing screen in the Galactic Council chambers. His 4 arms crossed behind his back as he watched the latest species requesting membership. Humans, another young race that thought they belonged. Among the stars, for 300 years, he had served as the military advisor to the Council. He had seen dozens of species come and go. Most failed to meet the standards. Those who did join usually took centuries to prove themselves worthy of real responsibility. The human representative stepped forward. Captain Jake Morrison wore a simple blue uniform that looked plain compared to the elaborate robes and armor of other species. His ship had docked just hours ago. It was small and unremarkable. "Honored council members," Jake said in the common tongue. His voice was steady, but Zethkara could hear the nervousness underneath. "Earth requests admission to the Galactic Council. We offer our friendship and our strength to protect the peace you have built." Zethkara's mandibles clicked in what his species considered amusement. Strength. These humans spoke of strength, while their technology was hundreds of years behind the Valyrian Empire. Their weapons were crude projectile systems and basic energy beams. Children's toys compared to Valyrian plasma artillery that could crack a moon in half. The Nexari delegate, her purple skin shimmering in the chamber's light, leaned forward. "Tell us about your military capabilities, human. How many worlds do you control?" "Just one," Jake replied. "Earth. But we have colonies on several moons and stations throughout our system." "One world," whispered council member Thizes of the Serpentine. "Coalition." His snake-like head swayed as he spoke to his neighbor. "They control one world and think they can contribute to galactic defense." As Zethkara accessed his datapad and reviewed the human military files, their largest warships were barely 300 meters long. The Valyrian dreadnoughts measured over 2 kilometers. Human population was just under 8 billion. The Valyrian Empire alone commanded over 400 billion citizens across 50 worlds. The humans had fought several wars among themselves. Zethkara read the reports with growing disdain. They used chemical explosives and metal projectiles. They flew primitive aircraft that would be destroyed instantly by any proper military force. Their nuclear weapons were impressive for such a young species, but they had only used them twice in actual warfare. "Captain Morrison," Zethkara spoke, his voice booming through the chamber. "Your species has no experience with galactic warfare. You have never faced an enemy with superior technology. How do you expect to contribute to our combined defense forces?" Jake straightened his shoulders. "Commander, we may be new to space, but we're not new to fighting. We've learned that the strongest weapon isn't always the biggest gun. Sometimes it's the will to keep fighting when everyone else gives up." Several council members made sounds that Zethkara recognized as polite skepticism. The Altarian delegate's tentacles writhed in what her species considered barely contained laughter. "Will to fight," Zethkara repeated. "Every species believes they have the will to fight until they face a real enemy. The Krex Horde destroyed 3 civilizations last century. The Void Collective consumed entire star systems. Will alone does not stop such threats." "No, sir," Jake agreed. "But will keeps you fighting long enough to find a way to stop them." Zethkara studied the human more carefully. There was something in his eyes that seemed older than his young species should possess. But it was probably just the arrogance that most primitive species displayed when they first encountered advanced civilization. The council deliberated for 2 hours. Zethkara voted in favor of admission, but only because the humans could serve as auxiliary forces. They might be useful for patrol duties in the Outer Rim, far from any real danger. It would give them time to learn proper warfare from their betters. When the vote was announced, Jake Morrison smiled and bowed to the council. "We won't let you down," he promised. 3 weeks later, Zethkara received reports that made him question the humans' placement in the Outer Rim. They had established patrol routes that covered twice the territory other species managed. Their ships were fast, and their crews seemed to need less rest than most races. More interesting was their approach to contact with local populations. Other species maintained formal diplomatic distances. The humans had somehow convinced 17 different mining colonies to provide intelligence about smuggling routes and pirate activities. They make friends quickly, observed his aide, Sub-Commander Vextar. Perhaps too quickly. The Rim colonists don't usually trust Council forces. Zethkara grunted. Making friends was easy when you had nothing of value to steal. The humans had been assigned the Rim because there was nothing there worth taking. Their enthusiasm would fade once they encountered real resistance. That resistance came sooner than expected. The Krex horde had been quiet for months, but intelligence suggested they were massing in the dead systems beyond the Rim. The Krex were perfect opponents for testing the humans. They were dangerous enough to provide a real challenge, but not advanced enough to pose a serious threat to the Council's interests. The Krex fought like animals. They relied on overwhelming numbers and brutal tactics rather than strategy or advanced technology. They were exactly the kind of enemy that would teach the humans about the realities of galactic warfare. Admiral Lisa Carter's request arrived on Zethkara's desk 3 days after the first Krex raid. She wanted permission to pursue the raiders beyond Council space. She also requested minimal oversight, claiming her forces could handle the situation independently. Zethkara almost laughed. The humans had been in space for barely 50 years, and they thought they could conduct independent military operations against an enemy that had been raiding the galaxy for centuries. He forwarded the request to the Council with his recommendation. For approval, let the humans learn their limitations the hard way. When they called for help, the Council could rescue them and demonstrate proper military procedure. The Council agreed with barely any discussion. Several members seemed amused by human confidence. The Thies's delegate made a betting pool on how long the human fleet would last before requesting reinforcement. Zethkara placed his wager on 2 weeks. The humans would make contact with the Krex, realize they were outmatched, and call for help. It was the pattern every young species followed when they encountered their first real enemy, but something nagged at him as he watched the human fleet depart Council space. Captain Morrison had stood in the same chamber where countless other species had made similar promises. Most of them had spoken of honor, duty, or the glory of their people. Morrison had spoken only of the will to keep fighting. As if fighting itself was something humans understood better than honor or glory, Zethkara dismissed the thought. Every species believed they were natural warriors until they met a real enemy. The humans would learn, just like all the others. The only question was how much help they would need and how many of them would survive the lesson. He filed his final report on human military capacity with the conclusion that had served him well for 3 centuries. Species shows potential as auxiliary forces, but lacks the sophistication for independent military command. Recommend close supervision during initial combat operations. Within the week, he would volunteer to observe the human response personally, not because he expected them to succeed, but because documenting their inevitable failure would provide valuable data for training future species. Zeth single quotes. Kara had seen war in all its forms across dozens of worlds and hundreds of battles. He knew what it looked like when a species was truly ready for galactic conflict. The humans, he was certain, were not ready. They would learn that lesson soon enough. Zethkara stepped aboard the UCS Defiance with the confidence of someone who had seen 1,000 battles. The human ship was smaller than he expected and much quieter than Valerian vessels. No ceremonial guards, no elaborate decorations. Just clean metal corridors, and the soft hum of machinery. Captain Ben Parker met him at the airlock. He was younger than most military commanders Zithgara had known, with short brown hair and calm blue eyes. His handshake was firm but brief. "Welcome aboard, Commander," Ben said. "We're honored to have an observer of your experience with us." I'm here to document standard procedures," Zethkara replied. "The Council needs accurate reports on human military capability." Ben nodded and led him through the ship. The crew they passed looked professional but relaxed. No rigid formations or elaborate salutes. The humans seemed to treat military service like any other job. "Our intelligence suggests the Kreks are using the Valdra system as a staging area," Ben explained as they walked. 3 raids in the past week, all hitting supply convoys near the Rim colonies. Zethkara accessed his datapad. The Kreks typically mass their forces before major operations. Standard response would be to request Council fleet support and establish defensive positions around high-value targets. "That's one approach," Ben agreed. "But defensive positions won't stop them from hitting other targets. We think it's better to take the fight to them." This confirmed Zethkara's expectations. Young species always wanted to attack rather than defend. They hadn't learned that patience and superior firepower were the keys to victory. The bridge was another surprise. Instead of the formal command stations he was used to, the humans worked at connected workstations where crew members could easily talk to each other. Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez stood at what appeared to be the tactical station, discussing something with Sergeant Kate Miller. "Kreks raiders usually travel in groups of 5 to 7 ships," Sam was saying. "But our scouts report at least 15 vessels in the Valdra system." 15 ships means they're planning something bigger than raids, Kate replied. "Maybe an invasion of one of the Rim colonies." Ben joined the conversation without ceremony. "Options? We could call for backup," Sam suggested. 3 Council cruisers could handle 15 Krek ships. By the time backup arrives, they'll have hit their target and disappeared, Kate pointed out. "The Kreks don't stay in one place long." "So we go in alone?" Sam asked. "We go in smart," Ben said. "Kate, what do you know about Krek's tactics?" Zethkara listened with growing amazement. The humans were planning to attack a force 3 times their size without proper reconnaissance or support. It was exactly the kind of mistake that got young species destroyed. "Kreks fight like pack hunters," Kate explained. "They surround there, target and attack from all sides. But they don't coordinate well. Each ship fights independently. Which means if we can break their formation, they'll have trouble reforming," Sam added. "Right," Ben agreed. "Sam, I want you to coordinate with our fighters. Plan a strike that forces them to chase us. Kate, work with engineering on modifications to our missiles. If we're going to be outnumbered, we need every shot to count." Zethkara had expected the humans to spend days in planning meetings like proper military forces. Instead, they were adapting their strategy in real time based on enemy behavior rather than fixed doctrine. The attack came 6 hours later. Zethkara watched from the bridge as 15 Kreks vessels moved to surround the human fleet. The Kreks ships were larger and more heavily armed than the human vessels. By every military standard he knew, the humans should have retreated immediately. Instead, they did something impossible. Lieutenant Sam Rodriguez launched the human fighters in a pattern that looked like retreat, but was actually an intricate trap. The Krek ships chased the fighters, breaking their defensive formation exactly as the humans had predicted. At the same moment, Sergeant Kate Miller fired modified missiles that split into multiple warheads just before impact. The Kreks hadn't expected their enemy to have adaptive weapons technology. "Now," Ben ordered quietly. The human ships moved like they were dancing. 3 vessels attacked from angles the Kreks couldn't cover, while the other 2 provided supporting fire. It wasn't the overwhelming firepower Zeth Kara was used to. It was something much more disturbing, that it was perfect coordination without formal command structure. Every human seemed to know what the others would do before they did it. They adapted to changing conditions faster than Zeth Kara could follow. The battle lasted 37 minutes. When it ended, 11 Krek ships were destroyed and 4 had fled. The humans had lost no vessels and taken only minor damage. How? Zeth Kara asked Ben after the battle. How what? Ben replied. How did you coordinate that attack? I saw no central command protocols, no formal communication procedures. Your crews acted independently, but in perfect harmony. Ben looked confused by the question. We trained together. We know each other. When you fight alongside someone long enough, you learn to think like they do. This wasn't military doctrine. This was something else. Something Zeth Kara had never encountered in 3 centuries of studying warfare. The second engagement came 2 days later. The Kreks had regrouped and brought reinforcements. 23 ships this time, including 2 of their heavy cruisers. Zeth single quotes. Kara expected the humans to call for council support. No sane commander would face odds like that alone. Private Alex Turner volunteers for the special mission, Kate reported to Ben. Understood, Ben replied. Make sure he knows the risks. Zeth Kara watched Alex Turner prepare for what was clearly a suicide mission. The young human would pilot a fighter loaded with explosives directly into the Krek's command ship. Even if he succeeded, he wouldn't survive the explosion. Why? Zeth Kara asked Alex as he suited up. Alex paused and looked at him with clear brown eyes. Because it needs to be done. My friends are counting on me. The colonies are counting on us. But you will die. Alex shrugged. Maybe. But if I don't do this, a lot more people will die. That's not acceptable. Zeth Kara had seen soldiers sacrifice themselves before, but it was usually for glory or honor, or because they had no choice. This human was choosing death simply because it was the most effective tactical option. The mission succeeded. Alex Turner destroyed the Krek's command ship and took 3 escort vessels with him. The remaining Krek's fleet lost coordination and fell apart under human attack. After the battle, Zeth Kara found Commander Maria Santos in the ship's small chapel. She was reading names from a memorial wall that included Alex Turner's name along with dozens of others. Does it bother you? Zeth Kara asked. Sending people to die? Maria looked at him with tired eyes. Every name on this wall bothers me. But you know what bothers me more? The thought of not being willing to make that sacrifice when it's necessary. I do not understand. That's what we do, Maria said simply. We do what needs to be done, regardless of the cost to ourselves. It's not about being brave or heroic. It's about being responsible for something bigger than our own lives. Zeth Kara stared at the memorial wall. In 3 centuries of military service, he had never encountered anything like this. The humans didn't just fight wars. They didn't just win battles. They did something that violated every military principle he had studied. They cared more about the mission than their own survival. Not because they were suicidal or desperate, but because they had chosen to value other lives over their own. As the human fleet prepared to pursue the retreating Krek's forces, Zeth Kara began to suspect that his understanding of warfare was incomplete. These humans fought with weapons and tactics that should have been inferior, yet they achieved results that superior forces couldn't match. Something was different about them. Something that made his 3 centuries of military experience suddenly seem inadequate. The humans were teaching him that he didn't know war as well as he thought he did. The emergency message reached Zeth Kara while he was reviewing battle reports aboard the council station. The transmission was marked urgent and came directly from the High Council chambers. Commander Zeth Kara, report to council chambers immediately. We have received disturbing reports about human military activities in the rim sectors. Zethkara put down his datapad and made his way through the station corridors. For the past 3 weeks, he had been analyzing the human victories against the Krex raiders. The more he studied their tactics, the less sense they made according to standard military doctrine. The council chambers buzzed with concerned voices. When he arrived, representatives from 7 different species were speaking at once, their various forms of communication creating a chaos of sound and movement. "Order," called the Altarian chairwoman, her tentacles rippling in the pattern that meant formal attention. "Commander Zethkara, you have been observing human military operations. Explain these reports." A holographic display activated above the chamber floor. It showed a star map of the rim sectors with human fleet positions marked in blue. Zethkara studied the display with growing confusion. "The humans have advanced beyond their assigned patrol areas," reported the Nexari delegate. "They are now operating in 7 different star systems without council authorization." "More concerning," added the Thies' representative, his serpentine. Head swaying with agitation, they appear to be hunting the Krex rather than simply responding to raids. Zethkara looked more closely at the display. The human fleet positions formed a pattern that looked random at first glance. But as he studied it longer, he began to see the logic. The humans weren't just chasing raiders. They were cutting off escape routes and supply lines. "There are also reports of excessive force," continued the Nexari delegate. "The humans have not simply defeated Krex raiders. They have systematically destroyed Krex infrastructure in the outer systems." "Define excessive force," Zethkara said. The display changed to show the Zarian Prime system. 3 weeks ago, it had been a Krex stronghold with mining operations and weapon manufacturing facilities. Now it showed empty space where installations had once orbited the dead planets. "The humans didn't just drive the Krex away," the Altarian chairwoman explained. "They dismantled everything. Mining stations, repair facilities, weapons storage depots. Nothing was left functional." Zethkara felt a chill run through his carapace. "I need to investigate this personally." "Agreed," the chairwoman said. "We need to know if the humans are engaging in war crimes or if there is another explanation." The journey to Zarian Prime took 4 days. Isara traveled aboard a council diplomatic vessel that was faster and more comfortable than the human ships he had been using. But comfort felt wrong somehow. He found himself missing the efficient simplicity of human military vessels. When they arrived at Zarian Prime, Zethkara was met by Colonel Frank Davis. The human officer was older than most he had encountered, with gray hair and lines around his eyes that spoke of many battles. "Commander," Frank said as he welcomed Zethkara aboard the human command ship, "I understand you have questions about our operations here." "The Council is concerned about reports of excessive destruction," Zethkara said carefully. "They want to understand your tactical objectives." Frank nodded and led him to an observation deck that overlooked the system. Where Krex installations had once dominated the asteroid fields, now there was only empty space and debris. "The Krex weren't just raiding from here," Frank explained. "This was their main manufacturing center for the entire sector. They were building ships, weapons, and training new raiders. We had a choice. We could destroy the raiding fleets and leave the infrastructure intact, or we could end the threat permanently." "The Council prefers measured responses," Zethkara said. "Proportional force that addresses immediate threats without escalation." Frank looked at him with an expression Zethkara couldn't read. "Commander, with respect, the Council fights wars to manage problems. We fight wars to solve them." "Explain." "If we had just destroyed the raiding fleets, the Krex would have built new ones. The colonies would still be under threat. More people would have died. We don't fight battles. We end wars." This was a military philosophy Zethkara had never encountered. Every species he knew fought to achieve specific limited objectives. The humans seemed to fight to eliminate entire categories of threats. Major Chris Young joined them on the observation deck. He carried a datapad filled with technical specifications that he handed to Zethkara. "We've been analyzing Krek's technology," Chris explained. "Their weapon systems are actually more advanced than we initially thought, but they're poorly integrated. We've found ways to improve them." Zethkara looked at the specifications with growing alarm. The humans hadn't just captured Krek's weapons. They had reverse engineered them, improved their efficiency, and integrated them with human tactical systems. "You are using enemy technology against them?" "We're using better technology against them," Chris corrected. "The Kreks had good ideas, but poor execution. We fixed their problems." "How long did this reverse engineering process take?" Chris and Frank exchanged glances. "About a week," Chris said. "Dr. Emma Clark figured out their power systems on day 2. After that, it was just a matter of improving the design." A week. The Valyrian Empire's best scientists would need months to analyze alien technology and years to successfully integrate it into their own systems. The humans had done both in 7 days. "Dr. Clark is here?" Zethkara asked. "She's in the engineering section with Captain Nina Brooks," Frank said. "They're working on applications for the new technology." The engineering section was a revelation. Dr. Emma Clark was a small woman with quick hands and bright eyes who seemed to see patterns in alien technology that others missed. Captain Nina Brooks coordinated between the scientific team and military. Applications. "The Kreks use an interesting approach to power distribution," Emma explained as she showed Zethkara through her laboratory. "But they never optimized it for maximum efficiency. We've increased output by 37% just by reorganizing the power flow patterns. More importantly," Nina added, "we've identified weaknesses in Krek's defensive systems. All of their ships use the same basic shield frequency. Once you know how to disrupt it, their entire fleet becomes vulnerable." Zethkara stared at the human scientists and engineers working around him. They weren't just studying enemy technology. They were systematically dismantling every advantage the Kreks possessed and turning it against them. "How many Kreks fleets remain in the sector?" he asked. "Frank, none," Frank replied. "The main fleet arrived 2 days ago. 43 ships, including their new Dreadnought-class vessels." 43 ships? Zethkara felt his mandibles click in alarm. That would require the combined council fleets to defeat. "How many human ships do you have in this sector?" 12, Frank said calmly. 12 ships against 43? You must have called for council reinforcements. Frank shook his head. "We handled it ourselves." "How?" Nina answered. "We knew they were coming. We knew their ship configurations and weapon systems. We knew their tactical preferences and command structure. When they arrived, we were ready for them." "The battle lasted 6 hours," Chris added. "No human casualties. Complete enemy fleet destruction." Zethkara felt something cold settle in his chest. "You destroyed 43 enemy vessels with 12 ships in 6 hours?" "We used their own weapons against them," Emma explained. "Their shield frequencies, their power systems, their communication protocols. By the time they realized what was happening, they couldn't adapt fast enough to counter our attacks." Frank led Zethkara to a tactical display that showed the battle. From beginning to end, the human ships had moved through the Krek's fleet like ghosts, appearing where they weren't expected and disappearing before the enemy could respond. "The Kreks fought the same way they always fight," Frank said. "But we didn't fight the same way we had fought before. We adapted. They couldn't." "This level of tactical innovation," Zethkara said slowly, "it should take years to develop." "Commander," Frank said quietly, "we've been preparing for this kind of warfare since before we knew other species existed. We've been fighting and learning and improving for our entire history. This isn't innovation. This is application. As Zithkara returned to his quarters that night, he realized that everything he thought he knew about human military capabilities had been wrong. They weren't a young species learning galactic warfare. They were an old species teaching it. The humans had been holding back. Everything the Council had seen was a carefully limited demonstration of their true abilities. They possessed technology and tactics that could revolutionize galactic warfare, but they had chosen to reveal only what was necessary to complete their missions. The question that kept him awake was simple and terrifying. If this was what humans could do when they were being careful, what would happen if they decided to stop holding back? Zethkara could not sleep. For 3 days since returning from Zarian Prime, he had stared at the reports about human military operations. The numbers didn't make sense. 12 human ships had destroyed 43 Krex vessels without losing a single crew member. He needed answers. Real answers. Not the polite explanations that human officers had given him, but the truth about what humanity was really capable of. The request took 2 weeks to process through Council bureaucracy. When approval finally came, it included a warning that made Zethkara's carapace tingle with unease. Access granted to human military archives. Warning. Information contained may challenge established understanding of galactic military capabilities. General Paul Mitchell met him at the human military headquarters on Luna Station. The general was an older human with steel-gray hair and eyes that seemed to see too much. His handshake was firm, but his smile was tired. "Commander Zethkara," Paul said as they walked through corridors lined with displays showing human military history. "I understand you want to see our real capabilities. The Council needs to understand what humanity brings to galactic defense." Zethkara replied carefully. Paul stopped in front of a large display showing Earth from space. "Before we go further, I need you to understand something. What you're about to see might change how you think about warfare." "Are you sure you want that?" "I have studied warfare for 3 centuries, Zethkara said. "I believe I can handle whatever you show me." Paul nodded and led him deeper into the facility. They passed training areas where human soldiers practiced, with weapons Zethkara didn't recognize. The soldiers moved with a precision that seemed almost mechanical, but their eyes held an awareness that no machine could possess. "How long have humans been at war?" Zethkara asked. "Since we learned to pick up rocks and throw them at each other," Paul replied. "Maybe longer." The first archive room contained physical artifacts from human conflicts. Weapons, armor, vehicles, and devices that spanned thousands of years of development. Zethkara examined a primitive spear point made from chipped stone. "This is 12,000 years old," Paul explained. "One of the first weapons designed specifically to kill other humans. Next to it sat a metal projectile weapon from more recent centuries. This rifle could kill a man from over a kilometer away. We made millions of them." Further along was something that looked like a metal tube with fins. "Nuclear warhead," Paul said casually. "This one could destroy a city of 10 million people. We built enough to destroy our entire planet several times over." Zethkara stared at the progression of weapons. Every human civilization had focused enormous resources on developing better ways to kill other humans. "Your species has been preparing for war for its entire existence." "Not preparing for war," Paul corrected. "Conducting war. We've never stopped fighting. Every peace we've ever known was just time to get ready for the next conflict." They moved to a room filled with tactical displays showing battles from human history. Dr. Rachel Moore, a military historian, joined them. She was a small woman with quick eyes and an enthusiasm for her subject that made Zethkara uncomfortable. "Most species develop space travel and encounter warfare," Rachel explained as she activated a display. "We mastered warfare then took it to the stars. The display showed a battle from something called World War II. Seth Kara watched human armies numbering in the millions fight across entire continents. The scale was staggering. How many humans died in this conflict? He asked. About 70 million, Rachel replied. But we learned things from that war that no other species has ever had to learn. Such as how to coordinate military operations across multiple planets simultaneously, how to supply armies that are scattered across light years of space, how to maintain fighting effectiveness when your forces are cut off from Command 4. Months at a time, Paul activated another display. This is from our Cold War period. For 40 years, two human nations pointed enough nuclear weapons at each other to end civilization on Earth. But we never used them. Why not? Because we learned something even more important than how to make weapons, Paul said. We learned when not to use them. The next archive room made Zethkaran's mandibles click in disbelief. It contained detailed plans for military scenarios that the Council had never imagined. Invasion strategies for species that controlled hundreds of worlds. Defense plans for threats that could destroy star systems. Tactical analyses of enemies that existed only in theory. Admiral Tony Richards joined them as they reviewed the files. He was younger than Paul, but carried himself with the same quiet confidence that all senior human officers seemed to possess. We've been planning for galactic warfare since before we knew other species existed, Tony explained. Every conflict we've ever fought taught us something about fighting enemies with superior technology, greater numbers, or unknown capabilities. You have contingency plans for fighting the entire Galactic Council, Sith Kara observed as he read through the files. We have contingency plans for fighting everyone, Tony confirmed, including ourselves. Hope for the best, plan for the worst. The tactical simulations were the most disturbing part. Human military computers had run millions of war games against every known species in the galaxy. They had identified weaknesses in Valerian plasma artillery, counters to Nexari mind control, and methods for defeating Altarian defensive technology. These simulations, Zethkara said slowly, they account for scenarios the Council has classified as impossible. Like what? Rachel asked. Invasion by multiple hostile species simultaneously. Defense against enemies with technology centuries ahead of your own. Warfare in dimensions that most species cannot perceive. We've been thinking about those problems for decades, Paul said. Just because something hasn't happened doesn't mean it won't happen. Colonel Janet Price arrived with a new set of files. She was a combat engineer who specialized in what humans called impossible problems. Her greeting was polite, but her eyes never stopped evaluating potential threats. The commander has clearance for the deep archives? She asked Paul. Full access, Paul confirmed. Janet led them to a restricted section that required multiple security checks. The files here were marked with symbols that Seth Kara didn't recognize, but that made his translator implant struggle to process the concepts. This is our real military capacity, Janet explained, as she opened files that showed ship designs unlike anything in the known galaxy. Everything you've seen so far is what we use for routine operations. The ships in these files were massive, vessels that dwarfed the largest Council dreadnoughts, weapons that could crack planets, defense systems that operated in multiple dimensions simultaneously. These ships, Seth Kara said, his voice barely steady, they're operational? Some of them, Tony replied. Others are still in development. We build what we need, when we need it. How many do you have? Enough, Paul said simply. Janet activated a tactical display that showed human military assets throughout the galaxy. The map was covered with indicators that Seth Kara hadn't known existed. Bases, weapon platforms, sensor networks, and installations that had been operating in secret for years. You've been building a military infrastructure without council knowledge, Sethkara said. We've been building defensive capabilities, Paul corrected. We hoped we'd never need them. But you're ready to use them if necessary. Commander, Tony said quietly, we've been ready since the day we joined the council. We've been holding back because we wanted to be partners, not conquerors. The final archive room contained something that made Sethkara's entire understanding of reality shift. Combat records from battles that had never been reported to the council. Engagements where human forces had fought enemies that officially didn't exist. The Kreks weren't the first hostile force we've encountered, Rachel explained. They're just the first one the council knew about. What others? Paul and Tony exchanged glances. Species that tried to invade council space before you knew they existed. Threats that we eliminated before they became council problems. Enemies that we've been fighting in the dark spaces between stars. A council believes the galaxy is mostly peaceful, Janet added. That's because we've been making it peaceful. Sethkara stared at the combat records. Dozens of battles. Hundreds of destroyed enemy ships. Threats that could have devastated entire sectors stopped before they reached council space. You've been protecting the council without the council knowing about it. We've been doing our job, Paul said. The job of keeping the peace. As they walked back through the archives, Sethkara felt like he was seeing the galaxy with new eyes. Humanity hadn't joined the council as junior partners seeking protection. They had joined as guardians who were already protecting everyone. Else, why show me this? He asked finally. Because something's coming, Tony said. Something that will require everything we have. And when it arrives, the council needs to understand that humanity isn't just another member species. What's coming? Paul stopped in front of the display showing Earth from space. We don't know yet, but our deep space sensors have detected something moving toward council space. Something big. Something that doesn't match any known technology. When will it arrive? Soon, Paul said. And when it does, you'll see what humanity is really capable of. The emergency sirens woke Sethkara from restless sleep. For 2 weeks since visiting the human archives, he had barely been able to close his eyes. Every time he tried to rest, he saw images of human weapons that could crack planets and ships. That dwarfed anything in the known galaxy. The council chambers were chaos when he arrived. Representatives from every member species filled the space with panicked voices and frightened movements. The main display showed something that made Sethkara's carapace freeze with terror. Ships. Thousands of them. But not ships like anything a galaxy had ever seen. They were geometric shapes that hurt to look at directly, made from materials that seemed to absorb light itself. They moved through space in formations that followed no pattern any military mind could understand. The Void Collective, announced the Altarian chairwoman, her tentacles trembling with fear. They have emerged from dark space and are moving toward the core systems. Sethkara had heard stories of the Void Collective, ancient machine intelligences that had consumed entire star systems before disappearing into the void between galaxies. Most species considered them legends. Nightmares used to frighten children. How many ships? Asked the Dice's delegate. Our sensors cannot get an accurate count, replied the Nexari representative. The formations interfere with scanning technology. Estimates range from 5,000 to 50,000 vessels. What about the combined council fleets? Silence fell over the chamber. The answer was written on every face. The council's most powerful fleet numbered just over 800 ships. Even if every member species contributed their entire military force, they would be outnumbered 10 to 1. We have received a preliminary report from Admiral Voskis' reconnaissance fleet, the chairwoman continued. Her voice was steady, but Sethkara could hear the fear underneath. First contact occurred 6 hours ago. The display changed to show wreckage floating in space. Seth Kara recognized the twisted metal as the remains of council ships, but they had been torn apart in ways that defied understanding. The destruction was total and precise. "How many ships did Admiral Vashka lose?" Seth Kara asked. "All of them," the chairwoman replied. 47 vessels destroyed in less than 10 minutes. No survivors. The chamber erupted in panicked discussion. Some representatives called for immediate evacuation of the core worlds. Others demanded that the council surrender and hope for mercy. A few suggested hiding in the outer rim until the Void Collective passed through. Seth Kara stood and walked to the communication station. His fingers moved across the controls as he opened a channel to human command. "What are you doing?" The Nexari delegate demanded. "Call in the only people who might be able to help us," Seth Kara replied. The human response came faster than he expected. President Helen Murphy appeared on the main display. She was an older woman with silver hair and eyes that seemed to see everything. Behind her, Seth Kara could see the bustling activity of a command center in full operation. "Council representatives," Helen said without ceremony, "we're aware of the situation. We've been tracking the Void Collective since they entered our sensor range." "President Murphy," the chairwoman said, "the Council formally requests immediate military assistance from humanity." Helen's expression didn't change. "I'm sorry, but the Council's standard protocols won't work against this enemy. We'll need to handle this our way." "What does that mean?" the NISE's representative demanded. "It means we stop playing by galactic warfare rules," Helen replied. "It means we stop holding back." The display changed to show human fleets moving throughout Council space. But these weren't the small patrol vessels that Seth Kara had seen before. These were the ships from the archives. Massive constructions that bristled with weapons he couldn't identify. "How many ships do you have?" the chairwoman asked. "Enough," Helen said simply. "Fleet Admiral Ryan Clark is coordinating the operation. Commander Seth Kara will need you as liaison." Before Seth Kara could respond, the display went dark. Warning. Alarms began sounding throughout the station as the Void Collective entered the outer system. 3 hours later, Seth Kara found himself aboard the human command ship Vengeance. The vessel was so large that it took 20 minutes to travel from the docking bay to the bridge. The corridors were filled with human soldiers and technicians preparing for a battle, unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. Fleet Admiral Ryan Clark greeted him on the bridge. The Admiral was a tall man with calm eyes and steady hands. Around him, hundreds of officers worked at stations that controlled weapons and systems Seth Kara didn't recognize. "Admiral," Seth Kara said, "I've reviewed the intelligence reports. The Void Collective has at least 20,000 ships. How do you plan to defeat them?" Ryan looked at him with something that might have been amusement. "Commander, we're not planning to defeat them. We're planning to erase them." The main tactical display showed the approaching Void Collective fleet. The geometric ships moved in patterns that seemed random, but Seth Kara could sense an underlying intelligence directing their movement. "Sir," reported Lieutenant Carol Thompson from her station, "enemy fleet will reach firing range in 30 minutes. All ships report ready," added Commander Steve Hill. "Boarding teams are standing by." "Boarding teams?" Seth Kara asked. "You plan to board enemy vessels?" "We plan to take them apart from the inside," Ryan replied. "The Void Collective thinks like machines. They expect logical responses to logical threats. We're going to do something they can't predict." A battle began without warning. One moment space was empty, except for the two fleets facing each other. The next moment, reality seemed to tear apart. Human ships moved in ways that violated everything Seth Kara knew about physics. They appeared in multiple locations simultaneously. They fired weapons that existed in dimensions he couldn't perceive. They coordinated attacks across distances that should have made communication impossible. How? Seth Kara whispered as he watched a human destroyer somehow occupy the same space as 3 enemy ships and destroy them all without taking damage. We've been preparing for this fight since we discovered other species existed, Ryan explained. Calmly, every war we've ever fought taught us something about defeating enemies with superior technology. Lieutenant Carol Thompson piloted her fighter through space. They folded around her ship like liquid. She attacked enemy vessels that were twice the size of anything humans had previously encountered, and watched them crumble under weapons that turned their own defensive systems against them. Commander Steve Hill led boarding parties that cut through void collective ships like they were made of paper. The human soldiers used technology that let them exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, making them impossible for the enemy to target effectively. Enemy fleet is falling back, reported the tactical officer. They're trying to regroup in the outer system. Don't let them, Ryan ordered. Captain Greg Adams, coordinate the final assault. Captain Greg Adams appeared on the communication screen. He was aboard a ship that seemed to be fighting on 17 different fronts simultaneously. Behind him, explosions lit up space as void. Collective vessels were systematically destroyed. Admiral, Greg reported, enemy command structure is collapsing. They can't adapt to our tactics fast enough. Then finish it, Ryan said simply. Leave nothing functional. Seth Kara watched in amazement and terror as the human fleet tore through enemy forces that should have been invincible. The Void Collective had consumed entire civilizations, but they had never encountered anything like humanity. The humans didn't just fight the enemy. They anticipated every move, countered every adaptation, and systematically dismantled every advantage the Void Collective possessed. When enemy ships tried to flee, human vessels appeared in their path. When they tried to regroup, human weapons disrupted their formation before they could coordinate. The battle lasted 8 hours. When it ended, space was filled with the wreckage of 23,000 enemy vessels. Not a single human ship had been lost. How? Seth Kara asked Ryan as they surveyed the destruction. How did you prepare for an enemy you had never encountered? We didn't prepare for this enemy specifically, Ryan replied. We prepared for the concept of enemies like this. Superior numbers, unknown technology, tactics we'd never seen before. We've been fighting wars against impossible odds since our species began. And you won every time? Ryan looked at him with tired eyes. Commander, we didn't win every battle. We lost millions of them, but we learned from every defeat. And we never, ever stopped fighting. President Murphy's voice came over the communication system. All Council vessels, this is President Murphy. The threat has been eliminated. Council, space is secure. As the human fleet began recovery operations, Seth Kara realized that his understanding of warfare had been completely wrong. He had thought war was about tactics and technology and superior firepower, but humans had taught him that war was something else entirely. War was about refusing to accept defeat, even when defeat seemed certain. War was about finding ways to win even when winning should be impossible. War was about never stopping, never giving up, never accepting that some enemies could not be beaten. Humanity didn't just know how to fight wars.